All right, kids, this is a big one, and I hope that it's going to be helpful to a lot of players out there. We're going to look at tactics for battle armor in BattleTech. Now, battle armor are the most commonly used, probably what we say like combined arms unit or non-mech unit in BattleTech. There's a lot of tournaments where they allow mechs and battle armor, but no other kinds of unit. And also battle armor synchronized with mechs really well, especially, of course, with omni-mechs that can transport the battle armor. So this means a lot of the time the first non-mech unit that you're going to be using is battle armor. So it's important to get that right, to get those skills down. A lot of the time you'll be using what we call medium weight battle armor. And especially the most common versions, which is the Clan Elemental and the Inner Sphere Standard battle armor. There's also lots of other kinds of battle armor, including heavier and lighter ones, and they have really quite a bit different tactics from the standard medium battle armor a lot of the time. But today I'm going to just talk about how do you play with medium battle armor and how do you use it to your advantage as much as you can. So let's look at the hardware that we're talking about here. And of course, let's start with the Clan Elemental battle armor, which was the first type of battle armor that was ever introduced into the game. I'm going to look first, we'll look at the flamer armed elemental battle armor, because if you play with the battle mech manual rules where flamers do heat in addition to damage, those are also called sometimes the improved flamer rules. These are really the best battle armor that the clans have at the medium weight for their battle value points. So take the flamer ones if you're playing with that rule for sure. Anyway, let's take a look at some specifics. First thing to look at is the battle value, which is cheap compared with, clan mechs. So what you've got here is something that is going to be really affordable. If you're playing competitively, you can take a significant number of these and you can use them to kind of fill out a force if you're running out of battle value points. The movement, right? They jump 3, so you pretty much always want to use jump movement with these things. I can't really think of a situation unless they're in a building where you're going to not want to use the jump movement. And if you think about this jump movement 3 for a second, the fact that it's 3 and not 2 is really crucial, because you jump 3, you're getting a +2 movement modifier, and that's in addition to the +1 modifier for firing at a small squad of foot troops like battle armor. So this thing is going to have effectively a +3 modifier to shoot at it essentially any turn that it moves its full movement. So they're actually quite hard to hit, and that's one of the things that make them fairly resilient. And then we come to the thing that is really the key to the effectiveness of the elemental. There's 5 troopers in the squad. They each have 10 armor and 1 what you might call internal structure, which is the trooper inside the suit. This means that it takes 11 damage to bring down a single elemental. You can think of the elemental unit as kind of like a mech or something of sorts that has 5 different hit locations. Each of them has 10 armor and 1 internal structure. And each of those locations has a couple of weapons on board, right? So you take out one of the troopers, you've taken out a couple of the weapons. But the important thing here is a 10-point hit is not going to kill a single elemental. So it's very hard to find weapons that will one-shot a single elemental. You've got to go up to something like a Gauss rifle or that level of power before you can just kill one of these guys with a single shot. And if you strip off all 10 of that armor, just leaving the single trooper point, you've still got something that is functioning at 100% the effectiveness in terms of its offensive power of a battle armor suit that still has all of its armor intact. So combine that with that +3 modifier to hit it that I was talking about before, and clan elemental points can actually just take a ton of punishment, especially compared with their battle value. It really takes effort to bring them down. You have to focus on them, often with multiple mechs for more than one turn if you want to just kill a point of battle armor. Now if you look at the weapons, I want to draw your attention to a couple things. First, you have this SRM launcher that has a couple of shots. You know, the damage is nice. It's really nice as, obviously, SRMs are good for crit seeking. Effectively, the point has an SRM 10 on board, at least if it's at its full roster of troops. What that means is if you have a target that your mechs have already stripped armor off of, and maybe some of the hit locations are open and they can take internal hits, then if you fire those SRMs, those elemental SRMs at it, you know, it's gonna be in serious trouble potentially, right? You have a lot of crit seeking potential on these elemental suits. And on top of that, you actually have in addition an infantry auto rifle. So the thing gets an extra shot. So you can actually make 3 shots in a turn with an elemental suit. You can make a shot with its main weapon, in this case the flamer. You can make a shot with its SRM2, and then you can make a little shot with its auto rifle, and it will do a little bit of damage as if it was an infantry squad with 5 auto rifles. That's not a whole lot of damage. It's going to be like 1 or 2 points, but that's another hit. So it's another potential crit seeking ping. So that's the real advantage of having this extra auto rifle on board. So it's actually really nice that the elementals have this extra teeny tiny little weapon. But now we get to the primary weapon of medium battle armor, or at least the best case scenario weapon, and that is their leg attack. The thing about the leg attack is that if you hit with it, you automatically get a roll to see if you inflict crits on the leg. And if you get an 8 or above on that 2d6 roll, you will be inflicting a crit on the leg of the mech that you've attacked. The amount of damage you do is 4 points, who cares? But if you get to inflict a crit, you know, that mech is in trouble, right? Getting a critical hit on your leg, you know, it really slows you down. And of course, as we all know, a slowed down mech is a vulnerable mech, right? It's a mech that's going to be having low target movement modifiers. It's a mech that's going to be stuck in place so that enemies can maneuver around it, get around its back, and blast it in the vulnerable rear armor. So leg attacks can really set up a mech to just be in bad trouble. And if you get the chance, if you end up in the same hex with a mech, you essentially always want to use that leg attack. It's the best weapon that medium battle armor suits have. Okay, so let's look at the Inner Sphere medium suits, the Inner Sphere standard battle armor. You take a look at it. So this is one version that I like. This is the version that has an SRM. The thing is, these suits only have a single SRM shot, so you know they're not going to be inflicting that much damage with their SRMs. But the nice thing about it is that their battle value is very low, 175, so less than half the battle value of the clan elemental suits. They still have that same movement 3, so they're still going to be just as difficult to hit as those clan suits. And they can shoot those SRMs on their way in, and then once they get to their target, they can use those leg attacks. So it's actually not so bad to have the single weapon be something that you're going to be using up, because you can't use your weapons if you're making a leg attack anyway. The only thing is, if your opponent is maneuvering well enough that you're not going to be able to get your leg attacks in, then the battle suits aren't going to be doing any more damage after they use up those SRMs. That's not necessarily as bad as you might think though, because even if you're not doing damage, you are scaring enemies away from the location that the battle suit is at. Now the problem with the Inner Sphere suits, the single biggest reason why the Inner Sphere suits are hugely inferior to the clan suits, is that they only have 9 points of armor for 10 points of damage that each suit can take total. This means that a PPC, 2 medium lasers, lots of different hits that these things could take will be killing them in either 1 or 2 shots. And so the suits are going to go down way faster than the clan battle suits. If you play with these a few times, you'll notice this effect is huge. There's just a massive difference in resilience between a unit of elementals that have effectively 11 armor each versus a unit of Inner Sphere standard suits that have effectively 10 points each. So then the other inner sphere suit that I would say you should consider taking is the Flamer suit. These are a little bit more expensive. They're 25 points, 25 BV points more expensive. And they have that Flamer so they can keep shooting after their first turn of firing. The only thing is that these suits don't have anything that they can do to an enemy that is more than 3 hexes away. And actually, since 3 hexes is the long range of those Flamers, probably you should think of your effective range as being just 2 hexes, which is really short with these short range internal or inner sphere standard battle armor. Okay, so let's get to the tactics. The key feature for battle armor that makes them so useful tactically is their mechanized battle armor ability. They have the ability to grab onto handholds on Omnimechs, and the Omnimech can transport them, just like, you know, like an APC would transport infantry of standard infantry. An Omnimech can act as a transport for battle armor. Now, when the Omnimech does this, the battle armor get in the way of torso-mounted weapons. So you won't be able to use your right and left torso-mounted weapons while you have battle armor mounted. This means that you don't want to just keep the battle armor mounted, you know, the whole game long, or keep it mounted longer than you need to, unless the mech is one of those mechs that just has arm-mounted weapons and no torso-mounted ones. But this ability is just really key, because the battle armor, they're mobile in a way because they have 3 points of jump mobility, so they can kind of get around once they're in a general area of the board, but they cannot by themselves get across a map very quickly at all. So you need mechs to carry them. So you should deploy battle armor always with Omnimechs, unless they're versions of battle armor that have magnetic clamps mounted, in which case you can use regular mechs to transport them, although that's less ideal because it slows down the mech that's transporting the battle armor. So how do you use this feature of battle armor? A first thought is that maybe you want to be really aggressive with it, right? Perhaps you want to run your mech that's transporting the battle armor right up next to the enemy mech that you want to target with your leg attacks, and just drop off the battle armor at point blank range from that mech. The problem with that option is that then the battle armor will be vulnerable in the turn that they get dropped off, because the turn they get dropped off, they don't get to move. So they're not going to get that all-important +2 movement modifier from their jump 3 movement. So in that turn when you drop them off, your opponent is going to be able to just open up on those battle armor with all of their weapons, because of course the idea is you're dropping off the battle armor at point blank range from the enemy mech. Well, at point blank range, that mech is going to try to just fire all of its weapons. They're going to be at short range. They're going to have an easier time hitting the battle armor. So you're going to lose a big chunk of your battle armor squad the first turn that you drop it off if you try this tactic. The only exception would be maybe if you use this at point blank against a mech that has weapons with a really crippling minimum range. Like if you were to use it against, you know, an archer or a salamander or something, you could potentially do this, but it's really not ideal. The other thing that's not ideal about it is that it's going to take you longer to get your transport mech right up next to the mech that you're targeting. And so you're going to have extra turns when that transport mech isn't able to shoot its torso-mounted weapons. Again, that's not ideal. You don't want to take a big part of your mech's effectiveness out of the game. So what you actually want to do is get your battle armor as close as you can to your opponent's forces, or to where you expect their forces to be, which is key. Get them there, and then drop them off in cover. Ideally, level 1 hills are perfect for this. If you can drop off battle armor directly behind a level 1 hill, well, they're only 1 level high, so then they're protected. They're fully protected. They can't even be seen by enemies who are on the other side of that level 1 hill. If you can't get to a level 1 hill, the next best thing is heavy woods, because that gives you that extra +2 target modifier that you're missing out on this turn because you're not jumping. Now, where should you put the battle armor to ensure that they will be effective at actually, hopefully doing some damage to enemy forces? Some games this will be easy. For example, if you're playing one of those types of games where both sides want to take and hold an objective, we call them sometimes King of the Hill games. Well then, if you put your battle armor within the objective area that you know your opponent is going to want to take, then you're in a really great situation because you've got the battle armor in a place where you expect enemy units to show up eventually. So battle armor are super good in those kinds of missions. Like in a King of the Hill mission, you want as much battle armor as you can get. Otherwise, you'll need to do some predicting. You'll need to do some work predicting where your opponent is going to put their stuff. This is easiest with your opponent's slower units, and they're also better targets for the battle armor because they can't outrun the battle armor as easily. If you drop some battle armor near a locust, the locust is just going to run away, and then the battle armor is going to be somewhere where it's not doing any good. So if you see one of your opponent's slower units heading towards some good cover, for example, that you could get your battle armor close to, if they're a turn or two away from that cover, that's a good time to run towards the cover with your mech that's carrying the battle armor and drop the battle armor there. A lot of the time it's easiest to target slow battle line mechs this way. So like for example, something like an Atlas or a Stalker is a slow mech, but it wants to end up close to your forces. And so those are mechs that are going to advance. They're going to be coming towards you, and that makes it easier and quicker to get your battle armor close to those mechs. Another way to approach it is as a kind of area control tool. If you have a location, like especially some good cover, an excellent sniper hill, that you really don't want your opponent to get into, well then you can put your battle armor there, and your opponent might avoid that location and not be damaged by the battle armor, but then that's benefiting you, because then that location, it could be of use to you, or at least it won't be of use to your opponent, and then the battle armor is doing work for you, even if it's not doing damage to your enemy. Or finally, if you want a kind of easier strategy with battle armor in the sense that it doesn't require so much work of predicting your opponent, put it on a mech that has arm-mounted weapons and is a close-range fighter, and then have that mech attack one of their slower, tougher units like that Stalker or Atlas. Maybe the mech jumps behind the Stalker and the Atlas, and at that point you can unload the battle armor, and maybe even that mech just jumps away or runs away and leaves the battle armor to fight the bigger mech. This is a decent strategy. You can do this with something like a Blackhawk, for example. Like a Blackhawk Prime is a pretty kind of classic mech to use for this strategy. But this is also a higher risk strategy in the sense that it requires putting one of your faster, and maybe fairly powerful mechs pretty close to a tough enemy mech, and a tough enemy mech that's likely to have some bodyguards. So, an Atlas isn't usually advancing on its own. They might have some backup, and the backup could be a real threat to your mech, or maybe to your battle armor if you drop the battle armor in a place that has insufficient cover. So with any unit in BattleTech, one of the challenging questions for players is, when do you move this type of unit in the initiative order? And with battle armor, this is a little bit trickier than it is with some kinds of units. So for one thing, early in the game, your battle armor is usually going to be on board a mech that's transporting it. That means that it doesn't get an initiative slot. Just the transport mech gets the initiative slot. This is another reason why you don't want to keep your battle armor on board a mech for too long, because you're losing a slot in the initiative order, which is a very valuable thing to have. Now once you unload the battle armor, you do face the question of when do you move it in initiative order. And this changes usually over the course of the game. Earlier in the game, after you unload the battle armor, unless you're doing one of those moves where you unload it right next to an enemy mech, usually it's going to be a little ways away from enemy mechs, and so you'll be able to use it as an initiative sink, because enemy mechs aren't going to be close enough to the battle armor for it to be a threat to them, since its threat range is so short. You can think of the threat range for a suit of medium battle armor as it's about 5 or 6 hexes for it to give a severe threat with its weapons, because the medium range for its small lasers or its flamers is going to be 3 hexes. But the battle armor can also move 3 hexes, so effectively it can strike at a target that is within 5 or 6 hexes from the place where it starts out. But you should really think of the very serious threat radius for the battle armor as being 3 hexes, because that's how close you need to be to get to a target and use that leg attack, which again is the most serious weapon that the battle armor has. So when you're getting into a situation where you can anticipate that there's a good chance an enemy mech might end up 3 hexes or fewer away from your battle armor, that's when you should think, now I'm going to start moving the battle armor later in the initiative order. And you should wait with that battle armor until after those mechs that it might be able to threaten have moved. Right? Once your opponent has moved all the mechs that you think might end up 3 hexes or fewer away from your battle armor, then you can move the battle armor at that point freely. Or if they move a mech, of course if they do move a mech within 3 hexes and you have a serious chance to threaten that mech with a leg attack, that's when you should move the battle armor at that point. So early in the game you can use battle armor as an initiative sink once they get off of their transport mech. And then later in the game, as a general rule, you want to hold the battle armor until later in the movement order, assuming that there are mechs that are potentially close enough to them that they could jump into the same hex and use a leg attack. Now I've told you how excellent the battle armor's leg attack is. You might be tempted to try out the other kind of anti-battle mech attack, the swarm attack. For a couple of reasons, this attack is not very good against mechs. For one thing, it's harder to hit with than the leg attack, but that's not the main thing. One thing that's pretty bad about swarm attacks is that they waste a turn. You don't really do any damage to the mech in the turn that you are getting on when you swarm, and then they could dislodge you immediately, and then you end up not doing any damage at all and just wasting a turn's worth of attack with the battle armor. But a worse problem is, once you're on the mech, now you are stuck on the mech, and they could try to punch you off, and if the pilot is highly skilled, then that could do a lot of damage to the battle armor and just dislodge them. Or a worse thing they could do is they could take their mech and submerge it in water, and that would dislodge the battle armor and kill all of the battle armor, because battle armor can't survive in water. So probably don't use swarm attacks against mechs if you are on a map, any map, but definitely don't use them if there's any water nearby. I've definitely seen it go really badly in those situations. It is sometimes advantageous to use swarm attacks against vehicles. It's harder for vehicles to dislodge battle armor, and often vehicles have lower driving skill than mechs have piloting skill, because driving skill isn't as good as piloting skill. So a lot of the time you'll be able to stay on the vehicle and do a lot of damage to it, and even if they do dislodge you, they don't get, they don't punch you. So using swarms against vehicles can be good if you have a situation where you want to attach the battle armor to the vehicle, but definitely don't use swarms against mechs if you're kind of trying to really win. Swarm attacks can be really flavorful though, so if you're like a game master and you're playing the clans against your players, then it can be really cool to use a swarm attack against their mechs. So what kind of mechs do you want to use to transport battle armor? Obviously you want to use omni-mechs. As a general rule, you want to use fast ones because they can get the battle armor exactly where you need it to go on the right turn more reliably. And it's fine to use jumping ones because this was something that was kind of counterintuitive to me for a while, but you can jump and unload battle armor in the same turn. And if you want the mech to be fighting on the way in, definitely make sure that its main weapons, or the majority of its weapons, are in the arms. So something like a Black Hawk is a good choice, although it's a little on the slow side, right? The Dasher is a classic battle armor transport for clans. You know, I have had a lot of success using a Dragonfly as a battle armor transport for clans. With the Inner Sphere, you have less of a good selection of Omnimechs. I would say the best ones, probably, well, the Owens is a fairly solid, difficult to destroy, fast light mech. So that's a good choice. Or perhaps the Blackhawk KU, the Prime variant anyway. It's short range, so you do want to get it close to your enemies, which is where you will want to unload your battle armor. And its weapons are in the arms. So it's a good one to use for that strategy of, you know, getting up close, jumping up close to an enemy big mech, which is a thing you'll want to do with that kind of Omni-mech anyway. And then in addition to making your attack, you unload some battle armor to kind of create a persistent problem for your enemy. That's a nice little tactic to use. So there's a lot more that you could say. I consider this to be kind of like a basic to intermediate introduction to battle armor tactics, but I hope that it was comprehensive enough that, you know, if you watch this a couple times, you pay attention to it, you can go out there and use battle armor to good effect in your games. That's my goal. If you start winning after watching this from using battle armor, I have done my job.